Go ahead. Good evening, John. Please, now we can start.
Good evening, everybody. I hope many of you have attended the last week's little discussion. To those, some of you would not have joined, but have joined only today, I'm going to do a short recap of what we discussed. We discussed that recent events in China, especially our northern borders, have made every citizen alive to a problem that there is a big fellow called China sitting on our border. And we do not know their real intentions. Is it just shown frightening us? Or do they mean in reality that they want to come and occupy Indian territory? And if so, what is that extent of territory that will satisfy them? And what use that territory has really got to do anything with their survival or their growth? Because any nation, any individual does things in self-interest. What is that self-interest which is served by occupying a few more kilometers of that border? When you ask that question, two things arise. Is China so very strong? Or India is very weak? Are we really weak? Are we perceived to be weak? Because even if you have an inner strength which is yet to be tested, please remember this, our strength has not really been tested anywhere. If we are really strong and not tested, what are our responses will indicate to the enemy? Is it an enemy fundamentally? Because you have to, as we grow up, many of you who are in your 40s and 50s, you're going to see at least 20, 30 years more of this life itself. I am 80 plus, so I don't expect to see more than 5-10 years max. In your lifetime, you must realize that global resources are finite, they are limited, right? There are unlimited sources of energy like nuclear, solar, maybe in future they will come. But everybody is asking for a share of the same resources. Therefore, we are all competitors with a common goal. What is the common goal? We want to improve the quality of life for our citizens. Therefore, you will always have enemies. If you examine last 2000 years history, which is recorded available, almost every country in Europe has fought with another country at least once or twice or even 10 times. At one time, especially during, let us say, 2nd, 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD, India was the all conqueror in our Far East Asia, what was known as Sri Vijaya Empire, coming from the Delta, Kaveri Delta. They conquered Indonesia, they conquered Malaysia, they went right up to Philippines, Fiji, Cambodia, Laos, Burma. That is why you see Ram temples everywhere. In Thailand, every single Buddhist temple is built on the base of a Ram temple. In fact, you can find the entire Ram Ravana story still in carvings on the base foundations of many Buddhist temples in Indonesia and Thailand and Laos and Cambodia and even in Vietnam. In Vietnam, they have recently discovered a Vigneshwara temple intact. Where does it go? So we are conquerors, we are defenders, we are independent. The meaning of it is different. Anyway, coming back to us, we discussed a bit of that. China is strong because, let us take it as bullet points. They are a homogeneous nation. 97% of their citizens come from one descent called Han, H-A-N, Han. Only 3% of their populations has different ethnicity. Compared to India, nearly 20, 30, 50 ethnicities coexist. We are not united by race, we are united by an idea. And if you examine the core of that idea, what makes Bharat united, that core of idea is simple, it is wrong, nothing else, which is common to from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. The one idea that unites us is our scriptural history, mythological history, and religious history. That's what unites us. Okay. Nearly 1,500 years of growth and decline of Buddhism in India could not shake up that original idea. We exported Buddhism so much so that very little remains in India. Right? Therefore, the difference between a ethnically homogeneous country and a multi-ethnic, multilingual country united by an idea is different. But there are many people around the world, in fact, 90% of philosophers agree that the idea is stronger than the individual. Therefore, our unity is assured as long as some of these ideals are kept alive. Then why are we seen as weak? We are one of the sources of weakness is that just comparing with our neighbor, China is united by an ideology, not an idea. That ideology of state-powered communism. We are united by a different idea, that is different. But we are just about the freest democracy in the entire world. There is no nation in the world which is more democratic than India. Why? Because our federal structure and our constitution made it so. They took elements from Greek, Roman, UK and US models, and they manufactured a compromise constitution which gave way to all these freedoms that we enjoy. Right? Even the American nation as a nation is not such a democratic nation as you think. If you're carefully reading all the things that they are writing about Republicans and how they are trying to restrict the vote of the minorities and how it works in that country and how a president who is defeated can still claim that he is not defeated and still the party survives, president survives, ex-president survives. Can it happen in India? It cannot. Can Amit Shah go to West Bengal and say, no, we are not defeated in West Bengal? We don't say that. Why? Because we respect our democracy. These two things are the source of our strength. We respect our democracy and we respect the basic idea around which our nationhood has been built. Right? Okay, sources of why we are seen as weakness. The nation was put into a track by the leaders of each decade. If you count the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010, 2020. Each period had a different kind of leadership, and that is how the nation has been traveling along the tracks laid by them. The Gandhi-Nehru family has had the longest innings in this. And unfortunately, even though there was a course correction attempted by Rajiv Gandhi towards market-oriented economy, towards capitalism, it was not succeeded. It left our Telugu Bidda P.V. Narasimha Rao to lay the proper structural reforms for a market force-driven economy, reducing government inclusion in our economy and enterprise, and increasing private enterprise. The seeds of our structural reform were laid in 1990-91. Before that, we were put on a socialistic, state-controlled economy path right from day one when the first 5-year plan was drawn up in 1950. They simply assumed that the state had to control everything: water, electricity, transport, communications, post and telegraph, banks. That means every aspect of life which touches you was controlled by the state till right up to 1990. Only in 1990 these shackles are started to withdraw, and the periods of liberalization, periods of inefficiency, periods of corruption, periods of lack of leadership. This ended towards the late 2010, 12, 13, 14. And since 2014, we have a decisive leadership which knows which track it wants to go. And that track seems to have paid dividends, because if you compare our financial strength in 1990, like let us say when the Chandrasekhar governments and others were formed and fell and things like that, our reserves were some minus, right? Today we have about 550 plus US dollar billion reserves. This weakness as a nation was shaped primarily by that factor that Nehruji chose to follow, even though he was educated in fully democratic capitalistic countries like UK, and the UK-USA combination had just won the war decisively. He did not choose to follow their path for economic success or the quality of life of their citizens. He was too much affected by Mr. Krishna Menon, and he chose to adopt the Soviet model of state planning. There was a political calculation behind that. If you look behind and analyze the decisions that the leaders took between 1950 and 1990, or even up to 2010, the political undercurrent of that kind of a national track is that the leading party of those days, Congress, chose that there is a combination of appeasement of a certain community plus support from the left will give them electoral success, right? And if you want to have the support of the left, the state had to adopt what you call seriously left of center socialism. There are varieties of socialism. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and others, they have practiced state welfare type socialism, which is neither left nor right. It simply said that we will take care of you in all events and allowed free enterprise. Some of the world's biggest companies were born out of Sweden, like Nokia and IKEA. Right? Therefore, I said that the seed of our weakness came in our socialistic planning methodology. The other seeds were what I put down, that the unfortunate death of Lal Bahadur Shastri Ji was one of the strongest leaders, even comparable to Modi Ji, that our country has produced. That famous slogan, "Eat ka jawab patthar se denge," that if you dare to look at us, we'll stab you. If you throw a brick at us, we'll throw a stone at you. That's that posture, that is that attitude, which is successfully carried out. But he died under mysterious circumstances. The assassinations of two leaders next, Indira Ji and Rajiv, also set back our country by, not that the single individual was so important, it created a dissension in our society. It created partisanship and enormous community distress, and how the Sikhs entire community was alienated. Rajiv Gandhi assassination alienated another section of our society. Okay. These cracks are only slowly being repaired by going back to the roots of our nationhood, that idea which unites us. We have forgotten that idea in the first 50 years of our existence, and that caused a hell of a lot of trouble. Plus, we were slow to industrialize. We were slow to militarize. Now I repeat some slogan which I gave at the end of my lecture last day. I believe in a formula called pride, power, and prosperity. Fundamentally, you have to be proud of yourself. Proud of yourself, your family, your community, your city, your nation, your state. When you are saying proud, It is not an empty pride. You have to be able to defend it. No, you say when you marry somebody, you take a vow: I will protect you through all your life. How many of us have lived up to our oath that will protect you all our life? Simple marriage vow. It is a family vow. Now, when you say I have pride, you have to have the means of protecting what you stated. And that means of protection come from two sources: economic power and military power. Without that, pride is an empty thing. One kick and you are thrown in the dust basket. Right? Many of us suffer from that ego and pride, which is empty, which does not have any stuff to back it up. Right? So, if you want to have national pride, you better have power also. And power comes from essentially from historically, it is known through, you examine the history of every country. The country which engaged in warfare comes out stronger. And the more you are destroyed, the stronger you become. Nobody knows, everybody knows at the end of Second World War, which were the countries destroyed totally by that war. Two countries, Germany and Japan, where every square inch of their territory, what we call a unified Germany of those times, and Japan, was bombed. It was reported that Germany received, over the 5 years of that bombing, nearly 5 tons of bombs for every square meter of their territory. And physically too. No city, no factory, no house was left standing. And yet, if you look at even 60s and 70s, they were the strongest economic powers. Everything we know in electronics was once considered great if it came from Japan. Every machine we purchased was considered great if it came from Germany. Not from USA, not from UK, not from Russia, not from China. How did it happen? Because military manufacturing and warfare gives a discipline to the people, and those skill sets, that knowledge sets, are permanent and they are ingrained into the society. There is somebody tells of a story of a pharma company called Schering. Schering was a very large pharmaceutical and chemicals manufacturer in Germany. And at the end of the war by 1944, only about 14 workers and one member of the founding family with a family name of Schering were left. Everything else was, what they had was destroyed. They had no bank balances. Fortunately, the knowledge storehouse of the company remained intact. That means the plans, drawings, processes, formula, they were preserved in multiple. When the war broke out, they made multiple copies. And what they did, they trusted their workers. And in every worker's house, they gave a steel cabinet in which these were preserved. And these 14 workers brought whatever was given to them for safekeeping to Mr. Schering. And they started from zero. By 1995, at which time I gave a lecture on this subject, they were a $20 billion company with leadership in all the segments that they were engaged in. How did it become possible? That means you got to be hammered into shape. You cannot eat rice and paisam and become strong. Right? This is the story. These things need to be corrected. Then these are the reason why we are seen as weak. The 1962 war, where China made incursions along the northeastern and northern boundaries, trying to choke off that little bit of land which connects Assam to the northeastern states. We had to give it up, and we had to rush to United Nations, and somehow the Chinese drew back. They tested India and drew back. That plus is the right time to answer one of the queries coming out of last week's lecture. My friend and colleague Arjun Nayak, professor, I hope he is listening. He asked me a question. Did our boys, army boys' performance in Galwan, have we frightened them off? No. They learned that if you press India, it will react. They will not draw back, they will stand firm. From the Doklam standoff and the Galwan standoff, and all along eastern Ladakh, along that Sangpo Lake, what happened? It showed that the Indian army is well prepared. But how strong it is in that mountain, you need what you know as mountain divisions. We have only 2 mountain divisions of at least 10,000 soldiers. We need 40 mountain divisions. To raise 40 mountain divisions, it will take a good 5 to 7 years. Equipment, training, including clothing, munition, the kind of weapons which work there, right? So how long can you withstand? Suppose a war really started in the Galwan area. How long can you resist? Usually the period of resistance is counted by not by how many aeroplanes and how many army soldiers you have. What is your stock of bullets? What is your stock of bombs? And what is the stock of your rockets and other kind of weapons? No nation is able to afford a stock of more than 2 weeks. Even the US cannot fight a continuous war of more than 4 weeks. So in 2 weeks, your future is decided, whether you survive as a nation or not. And that is one question. Second question is, can you fight a 2-front war on the west and in the north? Can you fight simultaneously a 3-front war, which we can imagine? Okay, to the east, west, and the north simultaneously? Can you fight a 2-front war with a southern front of naval attack? When you ask these questions, we have to say that we have to depend on friends and we can't do it alone. These are kind of things what we discussed last time around. We stopped at a place where we were examining if China is rising, on what account it is rising, and what is its real strength, and therefore, what are its real objectives? We summarized a little bit of that by saying that the current leadership, which is in China, led by Xi Jinping, made some promises to their nation, just like our leaders in every state, every MLA makes promises to our citizens. But the 2 promises which they made to their citizens for the 100th anniversary of China as a free country and 150th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party, these are 2 different things, 2 promises. One of the anniversaries is coming up very shortly. I think it is 2029 or something like that. Another anniversary is coming 2049. This promise which is coming up early is that Chinese leaders have promised to their citizens that they will recover all lands which are historically considered to be Chinese. That includes portions of Ladakh, portions of Nepal, Arunachal Pradesh, and a good bit of northeastern states. They considered as historically Chinese, right? That means these were under their administration of their chieftains or Samantrajas before the British came in and extended their influence and established what is known as the McMahon Line. What is the McMahon Line? It is a kind of a truce between Chinese tribal kings and British forces, almost the entire northern border. Did this line exist before the 1700s? No. What is there a historical border? If you want to go back to Ashoka time or Shivaji time or Mughal time, none of our kings were interested in the Himalayan regions except as places of pilgrimage. Okay, and since they were places of pilgrimage only, no king considered that it is their territory. It is God's territory. Who will claim Mount Kailash as my personal property? Can any Hindu dare say that? It is my district and pilgrims to Mount Kailash must pay tax to me. No, you can't do that. You don't do that, in fact. But you're not a Hindu, you have got no problem with that, isn't it? Right? It turns out that there is an economic reason for these so-called barren lands. There is an economic reason. The economic reason comes from the rise of our technology. Most modern technology, including electric vehicles, batteries, electronics, semiconductors, modern manufacturing, automation depends on what is known as rare metals. These are most common rare metal is lithium. No smartphone battery will work without lithium. And China holds nearly 70% of the reserves of lithium ores globally. There are other rare metals, molybdenum, titanium, tungsten, even rarer metals, neodymium and stuff which are totally needed and without which you cannot say I have high technology. The Indian company, an offshoot of our BARC called Indian Rare Earths, which tries to research for these materials in India and controls. It turns out that the high ranges of Himalayas, including Ladakh and all the Himalayas, contain deposits of these highly valuable metals. Okay. We were blind to these opportunities because of what is our, this is my personal opinion. It may hurt a lot of people hear it. You may differ with me also. What we consider as our success is also our curse. One field of enterprise globally where we are successful, we call it information technology. By using the word technology, we fooled ourselves into thinking that we are technologically strong. Information technology is not technology. The word technology you can only apply to processes which convert real materials into useful things. Example of technology, you need iron, steel, and stainless steel and other kind of material, copper, to make trains. We build locomotives and we make trains in ICF coach factory in Perambur and in other places in the north. But can you make a bullet train? The technology which builds a steam locomotive, the technology which builds a diesel locomotive, technology which builds an electric locomotive, and the technology which builds a bullet train, which is integrated. There is no part which is, we call, say, engine and compartment which are different in a bullet train. Because every part, the technology levels are 1, 2, 3, 4. Steam locomotive is James Watt, 1800s. Diesel locomotive is 1900s. Electric locomotives are also 1900s. Bullet trains, late 1900s, 1980, 1980. In fact, the bullet train, one of the first bullet trains ran in Japan in 1975. So what is technology? Technology which converts materials into goods of very high utility, which others cannot copy easily. That is technology. There is no technology per se in information technology as we practice it. If you had information technology, I ask you, do you have an operating system of your own? Do you have an internet of your own? You have GPS of your own? You have hacking algorithms of your own? Do you have AI algorithms of your own? Do you have cryptography of your own? Do you have very large database handling technologies of your own? Those of you who are in the computer field know all these questions I am asking. Do you have cloud data of your own? Do you have a supercomputer of your own? Do you have quantum computing of your own? The answer is all this is no. So how the hell do you have information technology? Information technology is needed. It created lakhs and perhaps nearly crores of middle class jobs and gave rise to a consumption economy. Any programmer or a group of programmers earn a decent salary, spend and give a little push to the economy or little portions of our economy, like high-tech city in Hyderabad or Hinjawadi in Pune or DLF enclaves in Gurgaon or in Bangalore. But how many people are benefited by that? The country is not benefited by that. And do these companies leave any productive assets? Suppose you shut down high-tech city. Can it produce anything else? It can't. But every automobile factory can produce tanks and guns and even aeroplanes. If you look at USA, UK, Japan and Germany, all their factories which produce all the weapons of war were originally automobile factories, metal factories, or even factories like making pipes and tins and boxes and trunk pieces. Where you have metal, plastic and rubber conversion as a base industry, that gives rise to technology in industrial and economic strength. Okay. And the base of that, because you have to feed the people, is agri-technology. Okay. Therefore, you can see the current set of leadership, why they are intent on passing the agrarian reforms. Because unless your agri-tech is sound, you can't have industrial tech. And unless industrial tech is sound, you can't have military tech. Therefore, let us come back to our original proposition. You have national pride, you need national power. When you have economic and military power, you have to be willing to project that power. How are you showing that you are willing to project that power? If somebody is hurting you from a distance, you have to go all the way and hunt them down and project your power, isn't it? You remember the famous case of the Munich Olympics, when the Israeli team was completely eliminated by terrorist action. And what is the response that the Israelis did as vengeance or revenge? They did not respect any national boundary or border. They went ahead and hunted down where were the people who hurt their sportsmen. And they were hurt in a third country. The attack took place in Munich. But they were able to announce within 3 or 4 years that not a single one of the attackers lived. That is projection of power. You have to be willing to do that. Otherwise, what is the point? You can't store bombs in your kitchen and have a good meal. You have a good meal after using the bombs and coming back hungry. I'm a passionate man and I may make statement. If somebody is recording and some police officer might show up on my door, I don't care. I'm 81, what they can do to me. Out of these, pride and power comes prosperity, if you follow the logic. Is it not? Prosperity doesn't come out of thin air. Prosperity comes out of being a strong nation proud of itself. Prosperity is a byproduct of this. National power, military power, economic power, and national pride is not a product of your prosperity. It is the other way around. Please recognize this fallacy in your thinking. Pride comes first, power next, and prosperity only comes as a third corollary of that equation. Before the Second World War, examine the period 1930 to 1940. America was the weakest nation economically. They went through a Great Depression. Capitalism, they said that was the death of capitalism. People who were owning shares or company directors committed suicide by jumping off from the top floors of Wall Street. But just after 4 years, from 1937 to 1944, when the Second World War ended, they were the strongest economically and militarily. They projected their power with one single objective, not because they loved the British, not because they loved the Europeans, not because they hated Nazis, not because they loved Stalin. Their single objective was they did not want the war to come to their shores. Okay. If I have to defend India, I would like to fight that war minimum of 100 miles from my borders. This is the reality. Now, let us start examining why China is strong. Fundamentally, I started by saying that it's an ethnically homogeneous country. It has one ideology, one party, and one goal. The goal is very clear. The first goal is to recover territories which they said historically belong to us, but we have lost. What is the second goal? Second goal, which they want to achieve by 2049, is that they want to be a fully developed country, assuring a very high quality of life to all of their citizens, and considered to be a global equal of all the powers in international matters, global matters. What they are saying politely, politically correct way is that they want to be counted as a superpower on or if equal, if not better than USA by that time. And the question is, can they do it and what is helping them to do it? The continuous economic planning and mistakes made by others also contributed to their rise as an economic power. This mistake was made in 1971 by Nixon, when they let go of their democratic ideal that we are a free democracy and we'll help democracies retain their independence. That was the real purpose of going into Second World War, isn't it? Declared purpose. But in 1971, hardly 25 years after the Second World War, they were willing to shake hands and become friends with China. Why? They perceived an enemy in Russia. They did not see we don't call it Russia, it is USSR. United, that means Russia plus Georgia plus Ukraine plus Tajikistan plus Mongolia, everything plus Siberia. The whole works. Huge territory, huge resources, small population, communism, which they hated, But Chinese communism, they didn't hate so much. And that shake hands, unexpected by China, they were taken by surprise. Because first visit, or 10 visits were made by Kissinger secretly to prepare for a meeting between President Nixon and Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong, who was alive at that time. They were taken by surprise. But when a gift comes to you, you don't reject it. They use that friendship to build China economically. China became the workshop of the world because of the trip made by Nixon and Kissinger from 1971 right through the 90s. By this time we had started woken up, they had already far advanced. We spent 1970 to 1975, those 5 years in US as a family. I was working and living in US. In 2 or 3 years, we found surprisingly that every shoe for sale in US in any town, any shop was made in China. Every overcoat was made in China. Every toy was made in China. In fact, a huge billion-dollar company called Toys R Us came upon the idea that it will make toys in China and sell in America. That company doesn't exist anymore, but it died. Toys R Us died. But that gave the economic base for the country to feed its people and absorb technology. But from the beginning, China adopted a policy that we won't honor any patent, any formula. We are free to copy and do anything what you like, what we like. Even till today, international patents are not recognized in China. Okay. Even international law is not recognized, that is different, right? So the source, that is the source of their strength. The other source of their strength is their, what you call, the way their people work and behave. Okay, I will give you 2 analogies to understand the difference. If you put a group of 100 Indians in a hall and put a table with 100 dishes on it, there is enough food for everybody. And say that, sorry, there are no chairs, so you go and pick up what you can. What will be the scene? The scene will be like if you put that food outside in a Maidan and how a bunch of crows will come and take away that food. That will be the scene in India. Same thing if you do in China, it will resemble an ant hive. There are graded people with assigned tasks. There are worker ants, there are soldier ants, there is the queen and the king, and there are some male ants which don't do any work. But every single ant in that hall will be fed properly, and there will be food left on the table. Self-discipline, work behavior, social behavior is so ingrained in Chinese culture that the kind of what you call lack of unity or lack of discipline that you see in a democratic state you will never see in China. It is not that the Chinese state is pushing them. It is because the discipline is inbuilt. I established ITM in 1991, very early in, I think, 96 or 97, 96, both years. We went to China to establish cooperation with Chinese universities. I remember in 1996, we went to Shanghai, and Shanghai is a big city. You need to do some sightseeing also. It was a Saturday holiday, and we could see hundreds of school children in Shanghai streets. Hundreds, literally, if not thousands. School children who are taking English as a subject, approaching every tourist and trying to talk to them in English. They didn't want help. They were not begging. They were not looking for a chocolate. They wanted a chance to talk in English to a foreign tourist. That is how you learn English, isn't it? Okay. Do you see that in India? No. If you see a foreign tourist, the Indian kid will try to see, can I get $1 out of this man? He will not say, I want to learn to speak English like you do. Will you speak to me? He won't say that. I've never ever seen anybody saying that. So there are cultural, the secret of their success is there actually. And the third person in the state unashamedly following pure self-interest for their country, for their citizens. No question about it. Why are they becoming stronger? There is something historically, which I think I told a bit of that in last Monday. To import oil and to import European machinery and goods, they also need high technology goods. Still, there are some machines which you can only Germany can make. There are semiconductor machines only Netherlands can make. Nobody else in the world, not even US. Okay. What you make the computer chips, it is called a fab line. And with the growth of smartphones and everything, the fab lines have become very important. There is one company, Taiwan Semiconductor, which does 70% of the manufacturing. But there is only one other company called ASML, Advanced Semiconductor Machinery Limited in Netherlands, which makes 90% of all the fab equipment for making computer chips. Right? This machinery which they need from Europe, or the oil and other products which they need from Gulf, or the refined oil products which they want to get from Rotterdam. Now the route is 12,500 miles from Rotterdam to Beijing. That passes through the channel, English Channel, which is controlled by the British Navy. It passes through Gibraltar and they enter the Mediterranean, which till recently was owned by UK. Passes through the Suez Canal. It passes through Aden and the Gulf, and it has to come via Diego Garcia and Maldives and Colombo, turn it, then go to near Andamans and near Singapore, and then turn north across between Philippines and Vietnam, travel through South China Sea, and then enter the Pacific, and then between Japan and China, and between Taiwan and China, and reach Chinese ports, Shanghai and Beijing. And Nanjing. Canton of the old days is called Nanjing now. None of these places is safe because China doesn't control any of these points. They're trying to get some counter control by buying that port from Habantoota or something in Sri Lanka, and Colombo Port City Development Contract, and trying to go through that CBEC, the Pakistan Economic Development Corridor, which gives them access to Gwadar Port. Okay, they're trying to get some control there, but they don't need it. The reason they're backing away from developing Pakistan is not that they can't live with Muslim community or Uyghurs, nothing like that. If you, after this lecture is over, on your computers, open up Earth app, or any maps app, and look, take a travel. From Beijing, instead of going south, you go north. About 500 miles, you come to Bering Straits, which separates Russia from America. that is Alaska actually. It is a Bering Strait is about 70, 80 miles wide, 100 miles wide. You cross that and turn left. You enter the Arctic ice shield, and that is navigable till about 5 years ago, only for about 1 or 2 months in a year, with an icebreaker in front, so you could make a slow journey to certain area. But since last 5 years, thanks to global warming, the ice shield has receded nearly a couple of 100 miles there, and that passage called the North Sea Passage is fully navigable 365 days a year. So you take a left at Bering Strait and you travel north of Russia, but south of the Arctic. You come across ports like Murmansk, Kirkuk, and then you enter the Scandinavian peninsula, what you call the North Sea oil. You turn south, you get ports like Hamburg and Rotterdam. That journey from Rotterdam to Beijing is only 6,000 miles. And the entire border is controlled by, at least on one side, by China and Russia. The entire journey. In fact, Russia is offering that navigational passage, but now the rules are that you have to be accompanied by a Russian naval military vessel as an escort. Then what happens to the economies of the Suez economy and the Gulf oil economy? What happens if the shipping tonnage coming through Singapore port drops by half? What China can use, Japan also can use, no? Right? Therefore, China is becoming strong and is becoming stronger. And in terms of purchasing power parity, I will explain in Indian terms. For instance, the real exchange rate in currency market is $1 to say 75 rupees. But if you say, what will $1 buy you in America and what will 75 rupees buy you in India, the real parity exchange rate is like $1 is equivalent around 25 rupees only. That means for 75 rupees, you can buy 3 times in India of the same item that $1 will buy you in America. Okay. The minimum price of a hamburger, McDonald's hamburger, is $1.50 in US. That is nearly 100 rupees. The average price of a hamburger in India, the same basic minimum, is just 20 rupees they are selling it, no? 30 rupees. And if you want exact same material, if you have in Chembur station, it is available for $10. Same bun, same hamburger, same everything. Same patty, same cheese, $10. So purchasing power parity basis, China's economy will exceed American economy in just another 5 years. In terms of US dollars, currently they are somewhere around 14 trillion, whereas US is 20 trillion. By 2035, American economy is expected to be somewhere in 25 trillion, and whereas China will reach 30 trillion, or minimum 25 trillion. They are building their naval power and air power crazily. In fact, they have adopted a strategy called the Blue Fisherman. They are making small armed vessels, which are in peacetime, they are fishing vessels. In wartime, they are what you call gunboats. Right? Till this day, these are in the capacity 200 ton to 500 tons, with a steel hull and protective armor, equipped as a fishing trawler, but carrying guns. They are called the little blue man. You know how many of them they have now? I think reportedly they have 6,000 of these gunboats. Okay. So we have a saying, even the biggest snake is killed by a group of ants, like a swarm of ants. That is the philosophy there. Succeed or not, we don't know. But 6,000 gunboats are very hard to kill off, you know. Whereas if there are 15 aircraft carriers can be killed in a week of fighting. You can't kill off 6,000 gunboats. For a naval nation, we are not, even though we have huge, we have two of our biggest border is a sea border. But yet we are not a naval nation. In Dunkirk evacuation in 1940, where 350,000 British soldiers had to be evacuated within 24 hours, UK could put 2 lakh boats into the sea. Right from two people, little boat with a little motor, to a large ship which can carry 50 people, 100 people. All these ships went out and evacuated 350,000 soldiers and their equipment in 20 hours in Dunkirk. While a 4,000 strong army was told by Winston Churchill that you are not returning. Your job is to keep fighting till every single one of your 4,000 group dies. And they did it exactly. Not a single person lived of the defenders of Dunkirk. But they helped 350,000 soldiers to live and to fight another day. Because that was the entire army of UK at that time. That is why China is strong. I think I have become very passionate. I have extended my time without thinking what is it India can do. And I will end by answering 2 questions which really sum this up.
And you can continue, sir.
Huh?
You can continue.
I'll continue, but I have to another 10-15 minutes. I have to go. Okay.
Anybody has any questions?
See, I received a very interesting question. China has a trade balance, like we have $600 billion. We want to use them. And the place to use them is if the American dollar remains strong, we get real value out of it. Suppose the American dollar falls in value to $1 to 30 rupees. What do we do with the $600 billion? What it will buy us? That problem you multiply by 10 times. Currently, China has a trade balance of nearly $3 trillion accumulated. Another 10 years, it will be anywhere $8 to $10 trillion. Are they interested in American dollar losing its value? No. Right? So, you see the scenarios. Will there be a war between China and America? No. Before shaking head, you have to think through this. There may be a war, but the war will serve only to increase the dollar value and not decrease it. It should be that kind of a war. Which is that kind of a war which is fought in a third country, neither China nor America. Both nations benefit. Both nations have to make more arms, more navy, more aeroplanes, more everything, and everybody becomes strong. Right? So, no Chinese leader will foolishly engage with war with America, but they will fight a small war in a third country which is supported on one side by China and another side by America. Therefore, that is one scenario. Another scenario is, can the Chinese fool America into entering into wars in other places which will weaken America? Yes, it is one of the recognized military strategies. You make your enemy make war with somebody else who will make them weak. Right? Therefore, if you consider a triangle between China, Pakistan, and India, China would want a war between Pakistan and India. It makes both the nations weak. And out of both the nations, definitely one side will be supported by Russia and another side will be supported by America. Therefore, the question raised by my friend that what will happen to that $1 trillion balance is China has no interest in making America weak on a long-term basis. It has all the interest in becoming an equal of America. Now, that is a situation which America has not faced in 400 years of their independence, or 450 years of their independence. America will never allow a nation to become their equal or better. That is unthinkable for an American citizen. Therefore, can China contain their economic growth? They will not. The present leadership will lose their heads. They have promised their citizens that we will make you as strong economically as any other nation in the world. We'll make you militarily strong. We'll make you economically strong. We wanted to be known as the second superpower, equal or greater than America. That is going to be very troublesome. China's declared ambition to be a world superpower and America's declared well-known fact of not permitting any other nation to be a superpower. That will be the cause of the problem, not their trade balance. In fact, if America enters the war, they will enter the war first by devaluing the American currency. They will destroy the trade balances held by their enemies. If you'll understand it better by saying, suppose instead of dollars, they were holding gold. Can gold be made valueless? No. But can you hold gold? No. Both are no. But historically, if you count the value of gold held by households, include it in the nation's gold reserves, which nation has the highest amount of gold?
India.
India has the highest amount of gold stocked up. And that value of that gold, the value of gold in one storeroom in the Kerala Padmanabha Swami temple has been estimated to be $1 trillion.
Wow.
Which they have dared not to, what that they have opened and counted. And there is another one protected by that Naga seal, which they are not daring to open. Okay. Out of the some 5 or 6 underground chambers, they have opened only 4 or 5 and counted the jewelry. And the 6th one with that particular seal, they are not daring to open still. So what about the rest of the country? Even every household, every individual wearing something 10 grams, 20 grams, 50 grams worth of gold. All of us carry by habit, isn't it? The American citizens don't wear gold. Many Europeans don't wear gold. Southern Europeans, like Mediterranean countries, Spanish and the Italians wear gold because they are affected by Muslim conquest in their lifetime, Moorish conquest or the Turkish conquest. So that is a different ball game. So the $1 trillion held by China has no meaning, except that it is a balancing factor. It is not a disturbing factor. Okay. Then the other question, what Arjuna has asked, I tried to answer. They're testing us. They don't want to make war. See, that these goals are, one goal is 5 years away, another goal is 20 years away, is a safeguard that next 25 years will not have a war. Because if they make a war, both these goals are not achievable. the target set by the Chinese as promised to their thing, they are not achievable by war. If they want to reoccupy, the resulting disturbances will prevent their economic growth to reach that level of America. And they have to be directly involved in it. That war they can't fight in a third country. They say that is my territory. They want to win this by persuasion and threatening and negotiation, not by war. And they will continue it forever. We will have the Doklam standoff or the Galwan standoff or the Eastern standoff. For the next 50 years, we will have this standoff without war. I will guarantee you that. Unless Indian commanders or Indian leaders are foolish enough to think that they can win a mountain war with China. We don't have that depth of economy to feed that war. War is a hungry animal. War consumes resources like anything.
Okay.
So I think that we have had a good appreciation of what the situation between China is. What are options for India? India has to actively take a side now. You can't sit on the fence. Strategic autonomy you can exercise by becoming closer to a friend without marrying that friend. That should be the strategy in future. So in blunt terms, you should be able to tell China that, look, we have an engagement with America, but if you force us, we'll marry America. That should be the strategy that preserves. In engagement, the bride doesn't go and live in the in-laws' house. No, you live your own life during engagement, and engagements can be broken. Even marriages are broken. That is different. But at least what looks like a courtship engagement, that's what the situation should be. And here, let me tell you unequivocally, who needs whom? My personal view is America needs India much, much, much more than India needs America. Why? Because the China-Russia border is no threat to both the nations. In a war with China, Russia will always support China. So if America contemplates in any military planning, war planning situation, a war with China in one form or the other, who is the one friend they can count on? Not Taiwan, not Japan. None of them have they may be emotionally at war with China, but they don't have the military power to make war with China. They are too close to China. Is it Australia? No. Is it Philippines? No. It's only India which they can play an effective counterweight in that kind of a war, what is the counterweight? Which will make China divert a part of resources which otherwise they will use against China, America. And we are the underbelly. Okay. And we have the capacity for a mountain war. We can keep them busy. What will be the objective in such a war? We want to go completely over Nepal and occupy it in the process of winning the war against China and win back Tibet. That takes the border north of the Himalayas. And we can make historical claims. Even since Mahabharata times, lands north of the Himalayas called Uttara Kurubhumi paid homage to the Mahabharata kings. As recently as Krishnadevaraya, if you see the history, Krishnadevaraya, Vijayanagara Empire received what you call Kappam from Guwahati, from Kathmandu, from Viratnagar. his power and influence extended up to the Himalayan borders. Right? So these are the realities of life. So what is strategic autonomy? Make real friends with America with the dual goal, acquire military technology and industrial technology. Europe will not give you that. Europe has a long-standing relationship with China, which they will protect. Almost 90% of all well-known consumer brands of Europe are supported purely by Chinese manufacturing. %90 of engines that BMW and Mercedes uses are made in China. So what is a car without its engine? Tell me. Okay. So that's where we are, friends. Thank you for allowing me to talk and express my views to you. We will see some other opportunity once a month, maybe a couple of months later, I'll come back to you with something. And keep watching the news. News is developing very fast in this speed. Watching the news with this framework to be able to understand. Then you will be able to dissect. Even our own leaders put in their ideology in that news. The Congress party puts their own ideology. The other party, leftists, put their own ideology. And there are no ideology parties which put to say we see nothing, we know nothing. You can analyze all these with a framework in view. Okay. Why is it that we are doing the thing that we are doing now? Okay. And why is it that America will need us and we have to play the game? We can't go there today and stand with a begging bowl in Washington. We need this, we need this. No, we have to wait till they come to you that we will give you this, we want your friendship. There's a difference. And that's going to happen very short, 18 months, 12 months, 6 months. That is the time frame. That will happen. Okay. Second thing, there is another factor which disturbs this global balance. President Biden has declared he will spend $6 trillion building infrastructure in America. What is infrastructure in America? They want to redo all their roads and they want to improve their train system to be on par with Europe or Japan or China. The railway transport system in America is still in the 50s. They don't have a single train going more than 160 kilometers. And currently there's only one. That is an Axle Amtrak train going from short distance, Boston to New York. Even though the technologies were invented in the US and in UK, they have been applied by France, Germany, Japan, and now China. Okay. So if you want to spend $6 trillion on improving road transport and rail transport, who is going to build them? Lakhs of workers. Will they ask Chinese people to come and build?
India.
Not today. That is a plus point for India. And if he gets going on that project, they will come to you. And that will open up a new chapter in our history. And it will go back to an old chapter. In 1970, 75, while we were in America, we traveled by road, lots of places in America. All the road bridges we crossed, 50% of them were built by Indian companies, Shapurji Pilanji, Walchand, you name it. Indian companies went and built bridges in America. Road bridges, railway bridges. Even till today, if you got friends in America, ask them when they're crossing a road bridge, examine the nameplate and find out who built it. Any bridge over 150 years old, built by Indian companies and Indian people. So we are not strange. We are going back a couple of centuries to undertake the work we began long time ago, to be builders to the world. Okay. Thank you and bless you all.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
sir.
very
Thank you,
much.
Ramnath sir. It was,
Thank you.
you know, it was like we wanted to hear and hear,
No,
but
no.
you know, time is the essence. And
Thank you.
you know, no, I am not. We don't have any votes to, you know. So
No,
I
no.
request Satish Shenoy to give a vote of thanks, and all the members put your questions. Maybe next time we can take up, and you can email and WhatsApp to us. I'll
Sure.
put my numbers. Over to Satish for vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. So thank you very much. It was a fantastic download of knowledge. And, you know, I seem so small trying to, you know, summarize or try to, it is simply superb. It has been pouring out from every pore of your body, sir. That shows the passion. You said it also, sir, in last Monday and this Monday as well. And I think it was one of the most intellectual kind of webinar that I have attended. So grateful to you. The manner in which you said it, you made it so sound so simplistic, but I'm sure it is not as simple as you put it. It just shows the kind of, you know, I don't know what to say, sir, but it just shows the kind of vast knowledge that is available to you. And sir, at your age, 81, which means 25 years from now, what I will be, I can't imagine how you've been able to retain so fluently, so easily, so nicely without repeating yourself. My God, I mean, I have so much respect for you and MTM. So nothing more I can say. There's nothing more I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Very interesting
Satsana.
topic. So simplistically done.
Allow me, I'll take your leave, sir.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
Jagan.
Yeah,
Thank you.
everyone, you know, can put on your video and big class for Ramnath sir.
No.
Big,
Thank you.
open up your videos. That will be very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you
I
very
don't
much.
need this. In fact, Jagam knows that I have never sought recognition in my life. So,
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
sir,
yeah.
no,
We are
it's
aware.
our interest, sir. It's our interest.
no. So,
Sir,
these
sir,
are all
you don't
truths
need-
I'm willing to
Sir,
talk.
sir, you don't need it, but we want it.
Thank you. Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
right. Bye-bye.
Please put your questions and your names and all. So
Yeah,
we'll connect
I'll
with you.
reply any QA and WhatsApp. No hassle.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would like to have such discussions. You know, you can also recommend some new speakers, new topics, you know, which will bring a new energy to the community. And we'll have such discussions, you know, once every month, and on the topics of national importance. Thank you very much.
Thank
You
you.
can put your questions and everything. The chat will open another 2-3 minutes. And those who have not put their names and all, you just put your name so that, you know, next seminar we can invite you. Put your mobile number or email ID. That's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Subhash, for introducing
Thank
me to
you.
this
Thank
group.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. Thanks to everyone.
Yeah, those who have put their messages and all, you can exit. Put your name, mobile number, or email ID, whatever is okay with you. And if anyone would like to have similar discussions, you know, they wanted to present any topic, they are open to talk to us. We have another 2-3 minutes. Anybody wants to talk anything, you know, is stage is open. Yeah, anybody wants to talk anything, you can just
I think we reached more than 75.
Subhash, you can stop recording now.
Okay, I will do that.